Welcome to the Final Word Daily. This show is brought to you by Brew to support brain health and performance. And it's a daily, but it's a pre-daily, because today is the day before the second Test match, which will be taking place between England and India at Edgbaston. I'm Daniel Norcross. I'm delighted to say I've been joined by Ben Jones, and I'm going to ask him to sum up what we're going to talk about in 30 seconds.
Thank you, Daniel. I think we've got a fair bit to cover. We're going to talk about India's poor record at Edgbaston and the importance of that turning around really rather quickly for the tourists. I think we're going to talk about England going unchanged and what that says about this particular iteration of Bazball. I think we're going to talk about Shoaib Bashir because it's a cricket podcast in 2025, so we're obliged to do a bit on old SB. And I particularly want to have a little natter about KL Rahul and his progress across the series, why he starts well and falls away, and what that says about our greater place in the universe.
Well, that's fantastic. I've written all those things down, but I can't remember what the first one was. So let's start with the first one, which is India's poor record at Edgbaston. I wasn't entirely aware of that. Fill me in.
Yeah, so they've played 8 tests at Edgbaston, and they've lost 7 and drawn 1. They don't win at Edgbaston, which it's a mild statistical quirk. There are only 2 venues where they've played more without a win. I think they've played 9 tests at Old Trafford and 9 at Kensington Oval in Barbados. And obviously this week they will go level with that. It will be their 9th test match, so it'll be entering that top 3 of non-happy hunting grounds. I just think it's worth noting, really. As we go into a week where there's going to be lots of talk about the local flavour, the balance of the crowd in terms of Indian supporters versus English supporters. That vibrant support from the Birmingham crowd, which does have a lot of subcontinental support, it hasn't actually ever translated into success, and maybe that makes fools of us for overly relying on these kind of little quirks and oddities.
Oh, I'd like that observation. I would also point out, though, that I think Edgbaston has changed over the years a little bit. I'm not so much in the fans that turn up, but in the character and nature of the pitch. And certainly this season in the County Championship, it might have been by design, but in a game against Surrey, where they had a Duke's ball, it was mind-bogglingly boring as two sides traded pretty much 600 apiece. It's been a dry summer. The pitch might be drier. In the last few years, we've seen it get easier and easier at Edgbaston. That epic test match against Australia, which had Stokes' declaration, of course, on the first day. And then England actually in prime position to win the game, but they couldn't get the last couple of wickets. There was a drop catch, wasn't there, I think, off Nathan Lyon towards the back end. But you could see it getting harder and harder and harder to take wickets. And I was wondering, are we expecting a similar kind of way for the pitch to play, or is it so dry and so hot? We've had 2 incredibly hot days for England, certainly 33, 34 degrees, that actually these conditions might really suit India's spinners, and they might be tempted to pick a really, really good wrist spinner that they strangely have ignored hitherto.
Yeah, it's crazy tactics, isn't it? Having a bowler of a type that no one ever faces, who is also really good. I'd probably pick him, to be honest. But we know that India for generations have been reluctant, or this particular modern generation, I should say, have been reluctant to pick a specialist spinner overseas. They don't really ever do it, particularly with Ashwin. That was always the thing. Why aren't they? They're blessed with Jadeja and Ashwin. Why aren't they playing them together? And that debate raged on for years, and now it's kind of reborn with the Kuldeep Yadav debate. Do you pick this guy who is, he's not necessarily going to contribute with the bat or in the field, but he is in these conditions, in dry, hot, sweaty, muggy, gross conditions. To be honest, it's horrible. I think it's my least favorite weather is hot English weather. It's grotesque. I've had to open the curtains in the house to try and get some light in so that you can see my beautiful face. But in doing so, I've unleashed the full power of the sun on my slightly greenhousey living room, and it's absolutely horrific. So right now, I'd pick 5 spinners. I think England have a poor record against wrist spin under Bazball. It's generally been against good wrist spinners. You don't tend to face bad ones in Test cricket these days because people don't pick them unless they're banging the door down. But to me, it seems open and shut that India should drop one of the quicks and get Kuldeep into the side. We've seen the last 5-6 years at Edgbaston. As you say, the pitches don't seem, it's the least seen movement in England. There's not really any swing although that's obviously less conditions dependent, more a bit of the luck of the draw. But basically, you don't see lateral movement here, and we've seen England more so than any other venue use bouncers at Edgbaston. They go to that kind of Stokesian, Bazballian, bang it in halfway down for the best and wait for something to happen. They do that a lot at Edgbaston because there's not really many other ways of forcing the issue with the ball. And India don't have a battery of quicks to do that, but they do have a pretty gun wrist spinner, and hopefully we're going to see him this week.
Just a little note on Kuldeep. You said he's not going to contribute much with the bat. His batting does appear to have improved a fair bit to me, and he has actually caused England problems in the past. And when you're sort of comparing it with a bottom four that was 9 for 7 in the last game, I would say Kuldeep has got every chance of batting 8 and being better than anybody else in that bottom four. But I suppose the other part of the puzzle that we've got to try to get our head round is the Bumrah conundrum. And I know it's a bit boring, constantly asking the question about Bumrah. We'll find out in good time when they come to do the toss. But where do you stand on this? It's a heck of a risk, isn't it, to go into a game when you're 1-0 down without your best bowler. People have been reminding me of the overthinking that England did in the Ashes, where they left out Mark Wood for the second game. And basically, once you've lost that game, you're done. I mean, they picked the wrong attack for Brisbane and then the wrong attack for Adelaide because of all this nonsense about rotation. There's a sense to it, we understand. And with Bumrah, obviously, there are issues about managing him and managing his workload. But by the same token, you can manage yourself out of series contention if you're not careful.
I always go back to, I think, Steve Harmison. It's a story that a friend of the podcast, Rory Dollard, tells about when he was chatting with Steve Harmison around that Ashes series. And Harmison said, I knew that they were done when they started saying, oh, it's a marathon, this tour. And he was like, yeah, it's a marathon, but it's a marathon you've got to sprint. You can't go into it managing for the fourth test in the first one. You've just got to win. You've just got to try and win. And that's kind of where India are. I think with Bumrah, if they leave him out of this test and they lose this test, he doesn't need to play again in the series because the series is done. You don't come back from 2-0 down. So he has to play this week for me. It's for me, it's open and shut. Because again, if they lose and he plays, rest him, send him back to Mumbai, put him in a cryogenic freezer and pick him up for the next test series. There's no point flogging him on what are going to be flat pitches all summer. They front load his involvement, get him in the first 2 games, and if they get themselves on the board, then they've got some questions to ask. Then they've got to go and, ask a doctor how many games do they think he can play, and if they say 4, then go and ask another one and see if you can get him to say 5, and go and ask another one and keep trying to get the second opinion that you want. You keep going, and I think that, all joking apart, if they lose this test, there's no decision to make. He doesn't need to play. So put yourself in a position where you have a problem. Give yourself a problem to negotiate, an obstacle to get past, which is at 1-1. What do we do with this perfect specimen fast bowler? Because at 2-0, there's no question.
In order to show that I am not biased and am balanced in this matter, I will respond to the Indian listeners who are screaming at this podcast with, yes, England did come from 2-0 down in the Ashes and actually would have won that series very possibly had it not been for catastrophic rain at Old Trafford. So there is a way back, but I think part of their conundrum is, I agree with you, Ben, it seems highly unlikely that you come back from 2-0 down very easily, but it's Lords is the third test. I think it would have been very easy if Lords had been the second test. But those skullduggerous devils at the ECB, seeing the Bumrah conundrum, have arranged Lords for the third, which Bumrah's going to really want to play. But also tactically, you kind of feel that he's going to have even more of an impact at somewhere like Lords than he would do perhaps at Edgbaston. So might that be the temptation? And also, given the power of India's batting lineup and the relative, not feebleness, but the relative, certainly, inexperience of England's bowling lineup, they might actually be after the lesser spotted draw. If they do have to bat first, they could bat for yonks. They've got a load of players who are in form, including KL Rahul, which is where I'm going to allow you now to talk about him. But broadly speaking, that Indian batting lineup from 1 to 7 looks pretty good. And if they wanted to say to themselves, right, let's get out of Edgbaston unscathed, unleash Bumrah at Lords, draw level, we're right back in it with 2 to play. That's a kind of legitimate tactic.
It is. But I feel like there's maybe I'm reading too much into vibe and non-facts, which is poor of me. I shouldn't let myself do such things. But I feel like this is a very emotional Indian setup. With between Rishabh Pant, who is a very emotional cricketer, Gautam Gambhir is a very emotional coach. Shubman Gill probably somewhere in the middle, but he's an inexperienced captain, and there's a lot of volatile characters knocking around the place. And actually trying to negotiate being 1-0 down is one thing. Trying to negotiate being 2-0 down or 1-0 down after two, I think you're starting to potentially light a few too many fires to give yourself time to put them out. I think they need to just focus on the short term, because the longer they delay their focus, the fewer chances they're actually going to have. If you over-undered it right now, how many times are India going to pick their best attack in this series? Which I think contains Kuldeep and I think contains Bumrah. If you pick Kuldeep here and then you don't, and you rest Bumrah and then you flip it up and you get to Lords, are you going to pick Kuldeep at Lords after what happened in 2018 when they picked him and it rained for 3 days? Like, it's not, you're really asking quite a lot of your attack to win a series in England when you're not picking the best four bowlers in any one given game. You're spreading your resources too thinly. So I'm very much team play Bumrah. Keep it exciting, but also I've got a vested interest in it because he's the best bowler of all time, and I want to be able to talk about him and do things about him on TV and talk about him on podcasts just like this. So.
Well, we all want to do that, but you also want to talk about KL Rahul, because you said right at the top there that KL Rahul has a habit of starting series well and then tailing off. Do you have a theory as to why this may happen?
I don't, in as much as I don't have a technical answer. What I do have is some more vibe and nonsense. So let me just run through the numbers. Just see, I have got them in front of me, and it's a well-known thing with KL that he comes into series. He comes in with intensity and focus, and often is very defensive and very controlled. And he does tend to start series very well. In the opening test of series, he averages 37. Now in the second test, I know it's not incredible, but it's for him. It's well above his test average. It's for him. For him, that's positive. In second test, he averages 31, and in third test, the average is 25. Now that's quite a significant drop off for a guy of that class to start positively and to have made a lot of big impressions early on. And I should say that pattern is more exaggerated if you only look at like the last 5 years or so. It's very much a kind of late era KL Rahul phenomenon. And I think part of it is that people became wise to his technical flaws in terms of we've spoken many times about him being bold and LBW to the ball coming back in, doesn't really nick off, but does get trapped on the crease a little bit, vulnerable to nip backers. And I think takes spot those patterns and prey on those weaknesses more as the series progresses. But I also wonder whether there's this thing with KL. There's like a Johnny Bairstow-esque quality of just like he could play 150 tests and it would just never quite feel like he'd excelled to the degree he could. Everything's always about the next thing with him. It always feels like greatness is just out of reach. And so he arrives into these series, you know, this is the final frontier, winning in England. We've not done it since 2008. We're going to do it. I'm going to focus. I'm going to spend all this time netting. And he comes in and he arrives. And it's almost like the emotion of being a player who was always about to be dropped almost drains him, and that across the series he's not able to keep that pattern of that pattern of performance up. I don't know whether that's real because I don't know him, and I'm not sat there monitoring his sleep in the same way as people. Well, when people talk about Steve Smith across a Test match, he doesn't sleep, and that's why he's crap in the fourth innings. I always wonder, like, who's actually checking that? Like, is someone outside his door just like listening to him shadow batting at like 4 a.m?
Well,
Like,
well,
I don't know.
Mel Jones. Mel Jones is normally monitoring that because she, poor thing, usually has the hotel room underneath him and keeps on hearing it going tap, tap, tap on the ceiling at 4 o'clock in the morning.
It's a very scary prospect, the concept of being underneath Steve Smith at 4 a.m. But I think Mel's is probably the more respectable of the two. I will say with KL though, is that I don't know how you feel about KL, Daniel. He's one of my boys. He's one of my players that I want to do well. I've always liked watching him bat. I always think that he's got a charisma about the way he plays when he clicks that feels like a batter. He feels like he deserves a better career than he's had, I would say, in terms of the aesthetics and the grandeur that he brings. And I'm quite up for him clicking and having a proper series and averaging 50 and going back a bit with his chest out and saying, well, we might not have won this series in England. See, I've already awarded it to the host, but I did well. I performed well, and maybe that's selfish, but I want him to have that opportunity.
Well, I know why you do it. It's because he's got hair, and hair gives people charisma, and it drives those of us in the bald community completely mad. I'm Team Saywag, not Team KL Rahul. I like members of the bald community doing well. I think they have charisma. But I hear you, and I've got nothing against KL Rahul, and I wish him all the very best. Look, we've done quite a bit on India here, which was, I think, the right way round, given that they're the side that needs to bounce back after losing what looked like unlosable test. So let's look at England. England, having won the unwinnable test, they've called up Jofra Archer, which seemed strange. Everyone thought, well, surely get some more overs in his legs. Then, of course, it becomes clear that there is absolutely no point in making Jofra Archer bowl with a Kookaburra ball, because the Kookaburra rounds that we're going through at the moment in the County Championship are designed for the players who are going to go to the Ashes and try and win with a Kookaburra ball. So why on earth would you have one of your bowlers who you're planning to send to Australia available to bowl a Kookaburra ball in an actual match? Far better to have him netting with a Duke's ball when he hasn't actually played a great deal of 4-day cricket. Now, none of that makes any sense, does it, Ben? Anyway. Well, whatever reason, they've called up Jofra Archer not to play him. I think a lot of people are quite pleased that he's not playing in this game, because he's a man who's, talk about workloads with Bumrah, has had one of the most high-profile workload failures way back in Mount Maunganui, wasn't it, 5-6 odd years ago, when he bowled 50-odd overs in a test match. So no one wanted to see him come in too soon, and I think quite a lot of people like the idea of him coming in at Lords. There's also, I suppose, the issue that although these games are quite close together, there is a week's gap between the first test and Edgbaston tomorrow. But at Lords, we've got a 3-day gap. So that's where workloads really could be pressurised, especially on a featherbed. So England go in unchanged. They're going to go for the same option, aren't they? It's going to be win, toss and bowl. So the question I put to you is, if India win the toss, and it's a beautiful sunny day, and it's supposed to be, and it's 27 degrees, and their best suit is their batting, and they've left out Bumrah because they're resting him for Lords, are they going to bowl or are they going to bat?
It's Bazball, baby. This is what it does: is it gets in your head and it convinces you that up is down, left is right, black is white, and wrong is right. I think the answer is, I think India need to focus on what they do best, and that they want to, if they pick Bumrah, get him out there, get him putting pressure on them, put England in, and don't worry about what England want to do, because England will find a way to maneuver the game into those kind of weird spots that Bazball does, where they're chasing 350 and they become favourites. I should say, just in terms of the venue stats, the last 4 tests, I should say, at Edgbaston have all been won by the side bowling first. So there is pressure on, there's pressure on the toss in terms
like Headingley was. So it's a very, very sort of similar situation. Yeah, we're looking at that.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's a bit less mythology around it. We're not talking, some of the great chases. We're talking about some relatively routine ones, but we have still seen the, pitch getting better to bat and all that kind of thing. Now, what I don't think India can afford to do is get obsessed with, the mythology and the kind of confusion that Bazball creates. We've seen that drove Pat Cummins mad. Across an Ashes series, you can get yourself and tangle yourself in a lot of knots, and that's when you're maybe the best bowler or best fast bowling captain of all time, and you've got a brilliant attack and a brilliant batting lineup to work with. Shubman Gill is inexperienced, has a talented but variously unproven batting lineup, and a slightly flaky attack, Bumrah aside. I think they just need to get into the game, bowl first if the sun is out, and not think twice about what England want to do. Don't muck around with it, because like we say, it's going to be flat. On flat decks, it's not about how, it's about how long. You just need to bat and bat and bat, and whether that's on day 1, day 2 or day 3, I don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference.
Okay, so lastly, the last topic that you wanted to bring up before we go to the Hall of Fame is Shoaib Bashir. Now, we get the feeling that it's going to be a dry surface. Steve Harmison has already said, I think, and been quoted on Cricinfo as saying it's dry, and that might concern England. We've already run through India's options for spin. England don't have any options. They've decided not to do options. They have plan A and no other plan. And that plan is Shoaib Bashir. And splendid spin bowler that he may become, he's still, can't buy a wicket in the County Championship, averages 40-odd in test matches. What's your take on Bashir?
My take is relatively straightforward. I think he could become a good bowler. At the moment, I don't think he is, and I don't think that's particularly controversial, really. There's lots and lots and lots of different metrics that I can run out and talk about, but the very simple matter of his bowling average is quite instructive in terms of saying that he is right now finding it difficult to make an impression consistently in Test cricket, and this week will be a really big test for him because it's, I think we've seen that in the first Test, India they're not against going after him, but they're also quite happy to let him bowl, I think. And they're quite happy to let him milk him for 3.5, 4 and keep him ticking, but not just hit him at the attack. I think that's quite a worrying position to be in as a spinner. In some ways, you'd almost rather the batters were coming at you trying to smoke you out the ground, taking risks, because then at least you're coming into the game. And we saw with the wicket of Shubman Gill that, when people do attack Bashir, he does get dip, he does turn the ball enough that he can force mistakes. I think the issue is that when he's not having those batters run at him, he doesn't necessarily make those mistakes. I mean, another simple little number. There are 175 spinners in the history of Test cricket that have bowled as many deliveries as Bashir. Only one of them has a higher economy than him, and that was Mark Craig. Do you remember Mark Craig,
I
Kiwi spinner
think
from
I
about
do.
10 years ago?
Yes, yes, I do. I do. My goodness, that's a fantastic stat.
It's a lovely one, isn't it? But the point is
Wow.
that he's not he is going at runs, at a historically high rate. Now that's fine if it's a trade off of he's also bringing wicket taking opportunities, because that's okay. That's what England want from their spinner. If you said he's going to be expensive, but he'll take wickets, they'll take that trade off all day long. I think the problem is that India are good players to spin, and there is every chance in the next few tests that we see him be expensive and not take wickets. At which point, England have probably got a bit of they've got a question to ask, because they want to try and get Jofra Archer into the Test team this summer. It's very clear. They want Archer to play. They also need Ben Stokes to be bowling. They also probably need to pick Chris Woakes to ensure that they've got some kind of a tail. Now, if you've got an ancient Chris Woakes, an injured Ben Stokes, and a coming back from injury Jofra Archer, can you afford to also be carrying a spinner who, on his day, could very easily be hit at the attack, or at least bowl 25 overs and go at 5.5? I'm not sure that's the case. So I think when they get to the position of bringing Archer in, there's a very decent argument that they need to drop Bashir in order to do so, to give them that little bit more wiggle room. And I think this week in Birmingham, with the heat, with the dry pitches, with all of the advantages that should bring, I think how he goes this week will probably determine whether or not we even engage with that conversation. Because if he goes well, then they're already all in on him, aren't they? Because loyalty and high release, the two most potent forces of our time. But I think if he struggles this week, and if England don't get the win, then they're going to start taking things a bit more seriously. For what it's worth, I think he'll bowl well this week because of all those things that we've spoken about, and I think India are going to start to try and put him under a bit more pressure, because there's only a few weak spots in this England side, and he is undoubtedly the weak point of the attack. And if they've got their wits about them, then they will run him, they will attack him, and they will try and take him down. And then, at which point it's just a toss of a coin as to whether or not he's going to get five for, or be maybe looking at unchecking himself in from the Ashes squad. Can you uncheck yourself in without a hefty fee? Probably not.
I don't know. I don't know what the cancellation policies are on all that. I'll have to check the small print. Anyway, it's time for a break. And when we come back, it's going to be the Hall of Fame. Welcome back. It's Hall of Fame time here on the Final Word Daily, brought to you by New Brew. It's a supplement that supports brain health and performance. It contains a range of ingredients called nootropics. The right combination can give your brain a boost when you need it. Its primary purpose is to increase sharpness, concentration, and memory. We all need a bit of that. And it's formulated in collaboration with scientists and nutritionists. They have many, many different versions, many, many different drinks. I'm going to concentrate just for a little moment on the black one, Pro, it's called. And New Brew Pro is great if you're physically active or always on the go. It gives you a clean lift without the crash, so your mind and body stay sharp. For all athletes out there, Pro is fully informed, sport certified. And I mention that because although I'm not necessarily particularly physically active, you are, Ben. I know you've been very physically active just of late. And of course, we're watching sport. And a lot of people who like sport like to be physically active. I need to get more physically active, and it's very hot out there. And I do also need to stay sharp, because in hot conditions, with long partnerships taking place by Indian batters milking Shoaib Bashir and putting more and more miles into poor old Ben Stokes' legs, How am I going to stay sharp in the commentary box? Well, it's taking the black one, New Brew Pro. How about you?
I'm going to be following you on that because I think I've been struggling in the afternoon sessions of the last test. I was particularly iffy. My
Me
analysis
too.
was off point. My typing was slow. My typos were aplenty, and I do genuinely struggle in those in the lull after lunch, the hour after lunch, and in this high-paced, frenetic media landscape. I can't afford to be falling behind and letting that hour pass me by. So I still haven't managed to get my hands on any because I think you and Adam are hoarding all of the new brew. But once I can
I've got a
actually
fair
get
bit.
some into my system, I'm gonna see a fair uptick in my performance, and frankly, I'm bang here for it. I
Well, I
I
did.
would also say I really think we need to put the phrase "milking Shoaib Bashir" to bed. I think it's slightly grotesque, isn't it? So.
It does seem, yes, I'm very sorry about that. But yes. Incidentally, if you would like to, go to newbrew.com/final word. That's Noobrew, Noobru. You'll get 15% off. The discount will be applied automatically at checkout. And Ben's right, I did have a lot, but I've actually worked my way through quite a few of them because I'm particularly keen, as I may have mentioned before, on the cherry-flavoured one. Anyway, more of which anon will be telling you about all of New Brew's products over the course of this test match and throughout the summer. How can we do a final word? I hear you cry. A Hall of Fame. How do we do a final word Hall of Fame when nothing's happened yet? Well, I've got an idea for you, Ben, and I haven't run it by you, which was either deeply unprofessional of me or just mean and cruel. So what I was going to do was ask you what you would really like to see happen in this test match. So the Hall of Fame is really delving into the mind of Ben Jones when he lies in bed at night, as we always do, looking forward to the next day's play and indeed the entire match and playing it out in our heads. What is it that you would really love to see?
This was deeply unprofessional of you, but luckily, I always know exactly what I want, which is I want to see Zach Crawley score 250 runs from 250 balls. And I will happily pin my colours to the mast on Crawley. I don't know anything about him. I don't know whether he's good. I don't know whether he's bad. I think he's probably a bit of everything. But what I want from him is that one bit of summer, that glorious moment where you go, oh, this guy might be the best player I've ever seen. When he's careering Australia around Old Trafford, when he's smoking Pakistan during the 267. I just want that moment for the summer. My little golden Crawley couple of hours where it's just sumptuous stroke play. So I will take that. I would like a Zach Crawley masterclass on an Edgbaston featherbed to show that he can make runs on flat wickets, which we already know, that he can maybe make runs against weaker attacks, which we already know, and essentially move the debate not one jot, but make sure that everyone gets rather cross about everything.
I think that's entirely reasonable. It is also an insight into your mind, as I thought it would be, which is why I asked the question. I was going to say something similar, and I don't want people to think that we're just focusing on our desires for England batters to do well. Fact is that I'm pretty sure that Rishabh Pant's going to be brilliant anyway, so we're going to get our fix of that. I don't need to wish for it. It's going to be marvellous, and we're going to be waxing lyrical about him at some point over the next 5 days. My wish for this game is for Ollie Pope to follow up 100 with another 100, because this has been an increasing problem for Ollie Pope of late. He can have one signature knock against a team, like think of that 196 at Hyderabad, and then the rest of it sort of like falls apart. And what I'd like to see is a little bit of consistency in his game, because I still believe he's a very fine player. And most importantly, I've got a bet on with the BBC's Henry Moran, which I made rather rashly a few years ago, that Ollie Pope would finish with a higher test average than Gary Ballance. It looked really quite possible until Gary Ballance then played a few games for Zimbabwe and upped his test match batting average. And now Ollie's about 4 or 5 points away from that. So what I would really like is an unbeaten 270 in a ball draw. That's absolutely fine for me. That just boosts that average and gets me closer to the 7-course tasting menu that Henry Moran will have to buy me when Ollie Pope finally declares his career over. So there you have it. Those are our Hall of Fames. That's an insight into our diseased minds. But they're getting less diseased as we drink more and more New Brew every day, I'm delighted to say. Just a reminder, go to newbrew.com/final word. That's Noobru to get your 15% off. We thank them for supporting the Final Word Daily throughout this summer. I've been Daniel Norcross. Ben Jones has been Ben Jones and will be Ben Jones again. Actually, tomorrow, he's going to be Ben Jones sooner than you think. And I also will be Daniel Norcross, because it's the final word and it comes round day after day after day. Thank you for listening. Hope you can join us next time.